and welcome. It's Chris from Christopher Hole Training. Welcome to this week's tutorial. The topic is lumbar lordosis exercises, and we're going to be talking about how to flatten your spine. As we know, lordosis is a condition of the lower back or the lower spine, and it's when that curvature of your lower spine becomes exaggerated. So what we're going to do in this tutorial is, first of all, the aim of it is to understand how to flatten your spine, because it's not just about doing the exercise, it's about how you do the exercise. So that's what we're going to talk about first, and it comes down to one fundamental technique, and that's how to flatten our spine, and that's what we're going to talk about first. Second of all, we're then going to break it into 4 exercises. We're going to talk about the exercises, and we're going to talk about the teaching points. Now, the final thing that we have to do is how to apply that fundamental technique. So when do we do it? How do we do it? And then how do we do it within the 4 exercises? Now, I've selected the 4 exercises not because they're a magic pill or anything like that, but I've selected them because they allow us to start off simple and then gradually become more complex. So as we become more complex, we are then able to control the position of our spine, because what a lot of people do is they jump straight in at the deep end and start with the more complex stuff, and then they find it hard to manage the position of their spine. But if we start off simple, we can start that process, and then we can start to work a little bit more in sort of complex movements and complex exercises. So that's how we're going to sort of structure it. So what we're going to do now is just quickly mention a piece of business, which is my social media platforms. So you can come to Twitter at Christopher Hole, Facebook Christopher Hole Training, and Instagram Christopher Hole. I'm posting more stuff there, putting updates on what's going up on the blog, so you can find out more about anything under the umbrella of health and fitness, be it nutrition, behavior, exercise, posture, habits, whatever it might be for health and fitness. I try and cover to give you more information on how to improve your health and improve your fitness. Alternatively, a little bit more specific to this tutorial, you can come to christopherholetraining.com and you can find my free guide, which is the best 4 stretches for lordosis. So you can go straight to this link here. It's in the description below, and you can find out the best 4 stretches for lordosis, which go really well with these exercises. So if you put these stretches and these exercises together, you're going to get a very good sort of mini program that can help you overcome lordosis. When you sign up, you just put your name and email address in. It goes, put your name and email address in. It goes straight to your inbox, and obviously you can start them today. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go straight on to PowerPoint 1. Firstly, I've got to build some pieces. So what I'm going to do is sort of build some pieces about the fundamental technique, and then I'm going to talk about the technique. So what we've got to cover first is what goes into the fundamental technique. So first of all, we're talking about the psoas muscle, which is this muscle here. And as you can see, it joins on to vertebrae 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It even goes up a little bit higher, but I just want to talk about the psoas with respect to the 5 lumbar vertebrae. So first of all, we've got number 1, which is the psoas muscle. Now this muscle pulls the spine into hyperlordosis because it joins onto each of the vertebrae. If this muscle becomes tight or overactive, it pulls the spine into that hyperlordosis that you're probably experiencing. What we then get is the psoas and the iliacus muscle. Now the psoas and the iliacus muscle, so the iliacus is this muscle here that joins basically all the way around the top of your pelvis, down through the hip and into the top of the leg with the psoas. So they sort of join in here. Now they group together really well, and what they do is they pull your pelvis into an anterior pelvic tilt. So you've got an exaggerated curvature of the spine here, and you've got an anterior pelvic tilt going across here. Now our goal with regards to this fundamental technique is, number 1, to flatten out the curvature of the spine and to make level, or at least improve the level of the pelvis. So those are the 2 things that we want to be focusing on. So that's why we're focusing on the psoas muscle and iliacus muscle. Now, the third thing, which is a little bit of a sort of another effect, if you will, that I won't be going into a great deal of detail on, but I do want to mention it, involves all of these adductor muscles that go up the inside of the leg. Now, when the pelvis tilts, it pulls on this muscle or on these muscles. And when it pulls on these muscles, it moves the knee inward, it internally rotates the leg, and can collapse the arch. Now, this isn't every single time, but it can happen. So with regards to an addition, with regards to these adductor muscles, is we are pulling the leg into internal rotation. And again, that's another thing that we want to try and sort of overcome. But we won't talk about that just yet. We'll talk about this in another video. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to the psoas muscle and the iliacus muscle. Now, for the most part, what we want to be doing is, from a very basic level and probably the most simple level, even before we get onto the 4 exercises, is we want to be lying on our back. And what you might find is that your spine overarches. So you've got a big gap between the floor and your lumbar spine. So there's a big gap here. And what you might also find is that your pelvis is tilted forward. So what we want to try and do is we want to try and level off the pelvis. So we bring that more level and we begin to flatten the spine. So instead of, when we lie down, we've got a big arch and the pelvis is tilted like so, what we want to do is we want to level off the pelvis and have a much less, excuse me, let's just rub that out. We want to have much less of a curvature going through our lumbar spine. So we want to try and take our pelvis and spine from this position into this position. Now, how do we do that? Well, we pull our abdominals tight. So that's the first thing that we want to be focusing on, is pulling the abdominals tight and squeezing the glute muscles or the butt cheeks or the buttocks together. So that's the 2 things that we want to do. So with regards to the one fundamental technique, it's pulling the abdominals in and squeezing the buttocks together. And what that will do, the buttocks will level off the pelvis and the abdominals will begin to level off the pelvis and minimize the curvature of this lumbar spine. And what you're aiming for is not necessarily to get your spine flat to the floor, but just to reduce the curve. So what you can do is you can place your hand under your lower back and essentially squash your hand under your lower back into the floor, if that makes sense. So that's the kind of thing that you want to be focusing on when it comes to this one fundamental technique of how to flatten your spine. Now, the reason we do it lead on the floor is because this is the easiest place to do it. The muscles of the torso are relaxed, so this psoas muscle becomes a lot more relaxed and the iliacus muscle becomes a lot more relaxed. As soon as you come up into the standing position, they'll start to go a bit tighter, not only because you're standing, but because your hips go into full extension. So basically your torso and your legs are straight, if that makes sense. So we want to relax them off by lying on the floor, and that allows us to be able to manage this position here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go on to the 4 exercises and talk about how we can apply this technique to them. The first exercise is the Cat Camel. Now, you may have seen this exercise before and you may have used it before, but in a different way. And what we want to use it for is to manage the position of the lumbar spine. So what we do is we start on all fours and then we go into an arched spine. Now, you might find that your spine is already quite arched. So you don't necessarily have to follow that teaching point because it might already be there. But one thing you want to then do is then go into a rounded position with the spine. So you're kind of going into this position. You might not get that far, but that's fine. Because what we're trying to do here is we're then trying to find the middle ground. So what we were doing when we were led on the floor before is we were using the floor and the hand as our marker to flatten the spine. What we're now able to do is mechanically move our position or posture of the spine into a more normal curve. So we want to try and take it from that arch spine into a rounded spine and then try and find that more normal gradual curve to the spine. Again, the reason we do this is the muscles are relaxed, and what we're able to do is learn the position, and that's the most important bit, because we're not just doing this exercise for the sake of doing it. We have an aim, and that aim is to learn that position. And once we've learned that position, what we can then start to do is tighten the abdominals around it, and we can start tightening the glutes and the buttocks around it. And the reason we want to do this now is when we're standing, as I mentioned before, the muscles become tighter. So we're starting off with these much more simple exercises and then building them bit by bit, or brick by brick, if you want to call it that, into the standing position, rather than just trying to go into the standing position and managing the position of our spine. So once we've come to sort of terms or got to grips with the cat camel and getting that into position, so number 1, arch, number 2, round, number 3, find that neutral position, tighten the muscles around it. What we then do is go into the bird dog. Now the bird dog is an exercise where we are on all fours, as you can see here. So I've got straight lines, I've got my wrist directly below my shoulders, I've got my knees directly below my hips. What we would then do is, once we start on all fours, now to make it even more simple, we would just lift one limb at a time. So we might lift one arm at a time, and then we might lift one leg at a time. So that's the second thing that we want to do. Now, when we're doing that, we go back to what we were trying to achieve. So first of all, we get that natural position of the spine. That's number 1. What we would then do is we would then tighten the abdominals and we would tighten the glutes around it. That locks it in position. What we then do is move one arm into this extended position. So we would have the hands out here. So we move that arm into extension whilst maintaining this curvature of the spine. So all the time, whilst we're starting to move, we maintain that position. And then the same goes for the leg. So we would extend the leg out. So again, it goes out into that straight position. Now again, when we do that, first of all, we get the position of the spine. We lock the abdominals around it. We lock the glutes around it. We then extend the leg and hold that position. A couple of things we do, or a couple of reasons why we do it, is again, muscles are relaxed. We learn the position. Now what we're layering on top of it is this improves hip stability. So when we bring one leg off the floor, we're now making our body less stable. And what we're doing is we're using our abdominals, we're using our glutes, so glute max, glute medius and glute minimus, which are on the side here. We're using those muscles to improve our hip stability, which will help relax the psoas and the iliacus that go through our pelvis like that. So the second thing we would then do is do all of the same with regards to getting on all fours, getting into the right position, getting the right position of the spine, lock the abdominals, lock the glutes. So once we've done all of that, so we're on all fours, we've got the position of the spine, we've locked the abdominals, we've locked the glutes. What we would then do is extend one arm and we would extend the opposite leg. What that then is doing, that's what's allowing us to improve our hip stability that much further, giving us or helping us relax the psoas and the iliacus muscle, as I mentioned. So far, we've talked about lying on the floor and just learning that position, learning how to engage the abdominals and the glutes. Then we come up onto all fours and we learn the position of the spine and lock the abdominals and the glutes around it. Then we come into the bird dog. We do exactly the same and we just use exactly the same principles, and we extend one arm and the opposite leg. This allows us to improve our hip stability on top of managing the position that we've talked about already. Now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the final two exercises and the final, I guess, two progressions that we would talk about as well. Exercise 3 is the hip thrust / shoulder bridge. Now, I recommend you start with the hip thrust first. Now, this takes us back to this position when we were led on the floor. So what we would do is we would find that sort of neutral posture of the spine. So again, we're not trying to flatten it, but we don't want it to be overarched. We want to find that sort of happy medium in the middle. What we would then do is, again, lock the hips in and lock the glutes in that we've talked about so far. So we're led on our back. What this allows us to do is set the hips. So once we've locked everything in, we set the hips. What we then do is we lift the hips from the floor. And then we want to hold the position of the hips whilst we come into extension. So here we've got an angle between shoulders and knee. But when we come to here, we're looking for that straight line up through. That's called extension. Now, what we want to do is what a lot of people do when they go into extension with lordosis is they go into that hyperlordotic overarch curve of the lumbar spine. But when you go into it, when you lock in the abdominals and when you lock in the glutes, you're setting the pelvis in that more neutral position. What that then allows you to do is as you lift, you then want to maintain that position of the pelvis. So all the way through. So you lock in the abdominals, you lock in the glutes. That should lock the pelvis into position. What you then do is you lift up through the movement. Now, you only lift as far as you feel possible. What you might find is there is a stretch going down the front of your leg. All that means is you use the 4 best stretches for lordosis to be able to loosen that. And then what will happen is as you go into extension, it will become easier. So these stretches and these 4 exercises work together to be able to manage the position of your spine. Now, what we're doing here is we're taking the hip or the position of the pelvis again to the next level, because what we're doing in all the exercises before, we've been flexed at the hip, so we've had this angle at the hip. What we're now doing is we're now challenging the hip into extension, but we're putting some load through it with the shoulder bridge and the position of the pelvis being on our back as well. So all of these are taking that ability to hold that position to the next level. And then finally what we would do is we would use the plank in either the kneeling position or the full plank position. Now, this depends on whether you can hold a full plank anyway, but even if you're holding a full plank and you cannot manage the position of your pelvis, then I recommend you go into the kneeling plank. It doesn't really matter how strong you are, because again, this isn't about performing the exercise for the sake of performing the exercise. This is about performing the position of the pelvis. And how you do that is you might have to regress some of the exercises and make them easier. But what we want to do for the exercise is we start on the elbows and they go directly below our shoulders. We have our knees on the floor and we have a straight line from our shoulder through our hips into our knees. Now, from here, you're going to be exerting a bit of physical force anyway. So what we want to do is, again, we want to pull the abdominals in. We want to engage the glutes and we want to flatten off the position of the spine. What this will do in turn is, again, manage the position of the pelvis here. So we've got a level pelvis, so it's not anteriorly tilting, and we've got a more neutral position through the lumbar spine. We've locked that in position with regards to engaging the abdominals and the glutes. So we're on our elbows, which are below our shoulders. We've got our knees on the floor, and we've now set our hips. Once we can hold and manage that position, you can then come up into the full plank because it's more challenging. And again, this position challenges your hip position in extension. So again, you can now see I've got I'm extended from my shoulder through my hip, knees, all the way down to my ankle. What I would then be ready to do is then come up into the standing position, because all through these, I'm understanding the position of my spine, which is a much flatter curve, but I'm engaging my glutes and I'm engaging my abdominals at the front. And that's setting the position of the pelvis here. So hopefully this has given you a better idea of how to flatten your spine. Hopefully it's given you a neat progression on how to do that. So it's giving you a logical progression, 4 different exercises that you can do to do it. If you do feel tightness as you go through these, you've got the 4 best exercises for lordosis, which complement these exercises really well, because it will help manage where the tight areas are. And it gives you something that you can be doing over a period of time, because this isn't going to happen. This isn't a magic pill. It's not going to happen overnight, but it gives you the opportunity to manage the position of your spine, and then eventually you can come up into the standing position whilst you're in everyday life and start managing that position of your spine. So hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully it's given you some ideas of what you can be doing, and it's given you some logical progressions and a little mini workout for you. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.